Welcome to our today's webinar. This webinar is organized under the umbrella of the International Scientific Association for Water Sustainable Management of Water Resources. This association is newly founded in 2019 and it is organized by this association. Just to let you know a few words about the association, just to invite you also to join our association. As you can see here on this slide, we are a network of 51 universities across the continents. And we have a group in Latin America, Middle East, North Africa, MENA region. We are in Sub-Saharan Africa, and we have a network in Southeast Asia. And there we have experts who are also part and supporting this association. And if necessary, a group can be built, and we offer a kind of service that is also a kind of portfolio this association is offering. Whenever there's a problem that needs to be solved, you can join us and ask our experts and to ask for a solution or to work together in a project. And that's why the main, so to speak, this is the main direction and the main mission, where the question can be answered, what do we do? And I already mentioned this, providing assistance with the solution of water-related problems. But also on the other hand, we would like to promote young scientists and students, especially young female students, to give them the opportunity to present their work within this framework of this network. But we also want to support young scientists. How do we do that? We offer a kind of award where students can submit their PhD thesis, and a group of experts will review the PhD, and then we will select among or out of a number of received PhD theses, the two best ones, and the two best will be awarded. But we also want to have an exchange of students. So we also offer a platform where students can exchange their experience, where they can have a kind of debating platform to have an exchange of knowledge and to also widen the network and to get to know each other. So these are the main directions. Of course, in detail, because of time constraints, I will not go into details. You can enter our website and you can also become a member of this association, of course. I would like to mention this. And as you can see at the bottom of this slide, there is the website connection. The link is given where you can get more, and if you like, you can join this network. For our today's agenda, let me go quickly through it. We have now the welcome note. After my talk, Professor Bülent Topkaya will give a short introductory note about today's topic, and he will introduce our keynote speaker, Professor Joep Schins from Twente University in Netherlands. Welcome, Professor Schins, and we are very happy that you agreed to hold today's keynote within our first webinar of this association. And after your presentation or after the keynote, we will ask the listeners, the participants, to write questions in the chat. And Professor Bülent Topkaya and myself will read the questions, and Professor Joep Schins will answer the questions. Please understand that we cannot answer all the questions if we have many, and I expect many questions. So that because of time constraints, we are not able to answer all these questions. So this was my welcome address, and I would now like to hand over to Professor Bülent Topkaya to continue and to give an introductory note of the topic and to introduce our today's keynote speaker. So welcome again to all, yeah, Bülent, the floor is yours, so to speak.
Yeah, dear colleagues, dear participants, I also want to welcome you to this first webinar of our new Swindon-Water Association. Thank you for coming. As our dear keynote speaker will talk about water very much in detail during this afternoon, my introduction part will be limited to a couple of remarks. According to an information from the website of Water Footprint Network, it is predicted that nearly 1.8 billion people in 17 countries will face with the potential of extreme water shortages in the next few years. Of these 17 nations, it is now critical, 12 are located in the Middle East and North Africa. 2 countries, India and Pakistan, are in Asia. The remaining hotspots are San Marino in Europe, Botswana in Africa, and Turkmenistan in Central Asia. The most common problems, such as water scarcity, water pollution, and depletion of freshwater resources, will be steadily more dominant during the rest of this century. This situation is caused by us, the human beings. We use and continue to use too much water. The main question is, what are we using all that water for? The water footprint concept can help to answer this question. Water footprint is one of the most important footprints related to environment. It is introduced by Arjen Hoekstra in 2002. It is based on the virtual water concept developed by Tony Allen, the mentor of Arjen Hoekstra. Unfortunately, Professor Arjen Hoekstra passed away much too early in 2019, just at the age of 51. He was also the supervisor of our keynote speaker today, Professor Jupp Schins. Professor Schins is civil engineer. He studied water footprint concept at the University of Twente, beginning with his BSc thesis on water footprint on barley production, continued with MSc thesis on the water footprint of Morocco and its added value for national policy. Finally, he received his PhD degree in 2018 at the University of Twente. His PhD thesis has the title Sustainable and Efficient Allocation of Limited Blue and Green Water Resources. Currently, he is an assistant professor at the Multidisciplinary Water Management Group at the University of Twente in the Netherlands. He is also the coordinator of the water footprint statistics and publication databases for the Water Footprint Network. And he is involved with the knowledge dissemination that he will also present today. Jupp Schins' research and teaching activities focus on the sustainable, efficient, and fair use and management of fresh water. He uses water footprint assessment methods to assess how freshwater resources are affected by goods and services we consume, such as, for example, food and energy, and how we produce them. He is author and co-author of several journal articles and publications. Among them are 2 publications on water footprint case studies for Morocco, as previously mentioned, and Jordan. And he also collaborated already with our colleagues there. I want to thank him for attending this webinar again. And Professor Schins, the virtual podium of Swindon-Water Association is now yours during the coming hours. Welcome again.
Yes, thank you very much for these introductions and also for inviting me to give the keynote at this webinar. I'm very happy to do so. I will share my screen. So I hope you can see my presentation now.
Yes.
Okay, good. Yeah, so I'm very happy to give today this keynote lecture on water footprint. And specifically, I'd like to tell you a bit more about the entire concept of water footprint assessment and how it can be used to inform how to transform our world to use water more sustainable, more efficient, and more fairly as well. And as mentioned, I am currently assistant professor at the University of Twente in the multidisciplinary water management group. Previously, this group was chaired by Professor Arjen Hoekstra, with whom I worked for over a decade. And currently, this group here is chaired by Professor Marcus Berger. So, before we start with the topic of today, I'd first like to get to know my audience a bit better. So I prepared a couple of questions for you. And you can access this questionnaire via this QR code. You can use either your browser or your mobile device for this. Alternatively, you can also go to this website, so www.wooclap.com, and use this code here. Now, please take a couple of seconds to navigate there. In the meantime, I will pose the first question then to you. Have you ever heard about the water footprint concept before you read this webinar's announcement? Okay, I see that people are finding their way to this website. Waiting just a bit longer to see if more people can be connected and answer to the poll.
So two could answer already.
The colleagues should just click on yes or no.
And then indeed send it. And you can navigate to this website using this code here. So wooclap.com/FFZKUZ. Yes, more responses are coming in, but with over 30 participants, I hope that at least some more people can answer to the polls.
Mm-hmm.
And it is completely anonymous, of course. Okay, then let me move to the next question. How would you grade your expertise on freshwater? Are you an expert in the field or general audience knowing a bit about water, or considering the network, I expect a lot of experts here. Ah, nice. I see that more people are finding their way to answering the poll.
Oh, they let me alone.
Okay, that gives me some idea of your background knowledge already on the topic. Then also about your interest. What is your occupation and in relation to water? Well, very academia focused, I see already.
Mhm.
And now about practice. Is water scarcity or pollution in the country that you live or work in an issue or not? Answering it for myself, living in the Netherlands, I would answer agree.
Mhm.
Particular water pollution is an issue, but water scarcity is also more and more on the agenda after recent droughts in Europe.
Mhm.
But you mean it is tolerable in Holland, the water pollution? Because
Well,
I
I
mean
just
the
read.
difference between agree and strongly agree. If it is tolerable, then okay, it makes sense to agree. But if it is, yeah, not very,
Well, in
okay,
that sense, I could say
sustainable.
strongly agree, but because they already were sounding the alarm bells that they will probably not meet the water quality requirements of the European Water Framework Directive in a couple of years.
Mhm.
But the biggest problem in Netherlands is groundwater, right?
Well, too much groundwater, you could say.
Mhm.
We often have wet feet, of course, and we are draining our agricultural fields because we have too wet fields. So we're really managing the groundwater, but not because we have too little of it, but because
Mhm.
we're just in the lowlands.
Yes.
And typically in the Netherlands, our entire management and also our expertise that we export to the rest of the world is focused on managing too much water.
Mhm.
But well, over the past 5 years mainly, it's become more and more clear to also the policymakers in the Netherlands that managing droughts and water scarcity is also really something that should be on the agenda.
Mhm.
Yeah, not because of water scarcity, maybe also pollution, groundwater pollution. Huh?
Yeah, indeed. So mainly nitrogen pollution is an issue here.
Yes.
Okay, thank you for giving me an insight in your background. Then let me go to the presentation again. So what I'd like to talk to you about today is first an introduction of the concept of water footprint. Then I'd like to move into the topic of sustainability. What are the limits to our water footprint? Then about efficiency. How efficient do we use water? Water for food and the water for energy. Then talk about the fairness and security of our water footprint, specifically about the water footprint of nations, how it differs, and the virtual water trade between nations. And then lastly, talk about how we can actually transform towards more sustainable, efficient, and fair water use, and what can be done about that, and who can act. So let me jump into the first topic, the water footprint concept. The basic idea behind water footprint is that water overexploitation and water pollution relate to what we consume. And because we are more in living in a globalized world where goods are traded internationally, the production of goods and the consumption of goods take place in different places. It also means that we are consuming water and polluting water to produce products that are exported to other parts of the world where they are consumed. So production and consumption are disconnected. And there are some countries who are actually benefiting from this and importing goods, water-intensive goods, thereby saving water domestically. But on the other hand, it also creates a water dependency for those countries. As was already introduced before, the water footprint concept was coined by Professor Arjen Hoekstra in 2002. And he was inspired by the idea of virtual water, which was coined by Professor Tony Allen. Actually, both of them passed away in the past 3 years, which was very unfortunate. the two main founding fathers of the water footprint concept. And Arjen Hoekstra, he based the water footprint concept on 4 foundations. One of them was the notion that fresh water is a global resource because we use water to produce goods that are traded internationally. The second idea was, well, fresh water, it is a renewable resource, but those resources, the resource rate is limited. Every year we have precipitation on the globe, but the amount of precipitation that we get in a certain place in a certain month of the year is limited. So it makes sense to talk about limits to how much water we can use in a specific place, in a specific part of time. Then because water is used to produce goods that are consumed elsewhere, this also introduces the need for supply chain thinking, linking also the consumer responsibility to water pollution and water scarcity in other places. And lastly, he also said it's necessary to not only look at blue water, the surface and groundwater, but also look at green water, which is the precipitation water or rainwater that we also use. We use that to grow crops and we use it to grow timber. So we also use that resource, that green water resource, so we should also account for it. And similarly, gray water should also be considered because also water pollution provides pressure on blue water resources, so it should also be considered. Then what is the water footprint? It is an indicator, a multidimensional indicator that is built into a broader assessment framework. And the water footprint concept has a couple of dimensions, as I said. It is an indicator of both consumptive water use, green and blue, and water pollution, gray water. When it talks about blue water, it's about consumptive use. So only the evaporation or the water that's not returned to the catchment anymore, which is causing a footprint, a pressure on the catchment. As I said, there are 3 colors, green, blue, and gray. And it's a water footprint should always be specified in a specific place and in a specific point of time. And it links to different human activities or processes. And it's about supply chain thinking. So this is not only about the direct water use of a consumer or a producer, but also about indirect use in the value chain, in the supply chain of that producer or consumer. So very briefly about the 3 different colors that we consider in water footprint accounting. That's green water, blue water, and gray water. Green water is the volume of rainwater or precipitation water that either evaporates from crop fields and from forests, or it's incorporated into the product. Blue water is about the volume of surface and groundwater that is consumed. So therefore, we also we differ from the classical indicator of water withdrawal, which because the difference between water withdrawals and blue water footprint is the return flows. And the gray water footprint, which is a volumetric measure of water pollution. So it is measured as an amount of water you would need to dilute a certain pollutant such that ambient water quality standards are no longer violated. And this is done in a volumetric way, so it can enter the discussion of water scarcity and also express water use, water pollution in a volume similar to water use. And the water footprint is about supply chains, so about indirect and direct water use in a supply chain. Here's an example of the supply chain of beef, which is in this case, in this example, in different countries, where the feed crops for the beef cows are produced in Brazil. The livestock farm with the cows actually is in the UK. There also the food processing takes place. Then the meat is shipped to a retailer in the Netherlands, where it is consumed by a Dutch consumer. And each step, there's a direct water footprint that is needed, in this case, to produce the feed crops, in this case, to manage the farm, to give the animals drinking water. But between those steps, there are indirect footprints that feed from the direct water footprint from the feed crop cultivation, for example, feeds is an indirect water footprint for the livestock farm, which depends on feed imports from Brazil in this case. Now, another question on WooClap. Which step in the value chain do you think has the largest water footprint out of these 5 steps? The correct answer is feed crop cultivation. By far the largest water footprint of beef, and for that matter any animal product, is related to the feed that is consumed by the animals over their entire lifetime that they need to eat. To produce that feed, a lot of water is evaporated from the feed crop fields. So for beef cows, from the top of my head, it's around 85% of the total water footprint of beef is related to feed crop cultivation. Now, do you have any idea how large the water footprint of beef is? The global average value? Just a ballpark figure. Nicely variation in the answers, but the correct answer is 15,000 liters per kilogram of beef. And that's mainly green water. So as I already said, this is about mainly around 85% relates to the water footprint in the feed crop cultivation phase, and it's mainly about the rainwater that is evaporated from the crop fields. And you can wonder, well, green water, who cares? It's just rainwater, it's free. Well, we also account for green water because it does mean that we appropriate this green water resource, in this case for feed crops, to actually feed cows for human consumption. We could have also decided to use that green water for other purposes, to grow crops directly for human consumption, which would be more efficient from a water perspective. Or we could have used the water to simply leave it to nature. So there is a human appropriation of that water flow for the specific activity, in this case feed crops for bovine meat cultivation, and therefore we also consider that as a part of the water footprint. And to give you some idea how large 15,000 liters is, well, it's about the size of such a bucket. So when we calculate the water footprint, our basis is always here at the bottom, the water footprint of a certain unit, process, or particular activity. For example, growing a crop. And from there on, we can start to sum that water footprint of different processes and aggregate it to different levels. For example, we can take the production perspective or the geographic perspective and calculate the water footprint of all the activities in an area, or of all the activities in a larger river basin, or for that matter, all the activities on the world. And then we can talk about the water footprint of global production. So this is the production perspective. Another perspective is the consumption perspective or the supply chain perspective. For example, we can talk about a specific product, the example of beef that we just looked at, and look at what is the water footprint if we sum all the different steps that were needed to produce this piece of beef. That's the product perspective. You can do something similar on a larger aggregation level, for example, for a person or for a community, all the people living in the country that you live in. You can consider what do they consume, how much water has been used to produce the products that they consume. And if we sum that for all the people, all the consumers of our world, we arrive at the water footprint of global consumption, which is actually equal to what we produce on a global level. And then lastly, you can also do this from the perspective of companies. So each company has an operational water footprint, the water footprint of their own industries, but they also have a supply chain water footprint. And if you would, you could, for each company, you could address the water footprint of their supply chain. And if you would aggregate the water footprint of each individual producer, you will also arrive at the water footprint of global production. So the water footprint was coined in 2002, and it gained more and more interest in the years thereafter. Also, a lot of corporate interest, which ultimately led to a push to develop a global standard for water footprint assessment. And this was published in 2011, and that method, that water footprint assessment method, distinguishes 4 phases. First, to set the goals and the scope of an assessment. Then to actually do the accounting, calculate the water footprints. Then in phase 3, to place these water footprints in the context of maximum sustainable footprints, maximum sustainable levels to green water use, blue water use, and gray water use. And then lastly, to decide in phase 4 how to respond to that. How can we reduce our water footprint and where should we focus our attention in doing so? And then talking about the limits to the water footprint, the sustainability part of water footprint assessment, I'd like to address with you how we are actually currently performing in terms of the global water footprint of humanity. But first, what are those limits? Well, if we consider a catchment, the ultimate source of freshwater availability in that catchment is rainfall. And that rainfall partitions into green water, evaporation or evapotranspiration, if you will, from the land surface, and into blue water, the runoff via surface water and groundwater resources. Now, part of those flows of both green water and blue water, we should leave for the environment. We should leave part of the water in the river, the so-called environmental flow requirements, which subtracts from what we actually can use, leaving a certain amount of blue water availability or maximum sustainable blue water footprint. And for green water, I have argued during my PhD, you can do something very similar. You also cannot use all the land and all the green water resources attached to that land to produce things for humanity. We also need to set aside certain parts of the land and reserve them for biodiversity conservation. So you can also talk about environmental green water needs, leaving only a smaller fraction of green water availability for humans to use. And those translate into maximum sustainable green and blue water footprints. Now, we actually did those analyses on a global scale at the grid level to see what are actually our maximum sustainable blue water footprints and how do our current blue water footprints compare to that. So in this study, well, first of all, we calculated the blue water footprint of every grid cell on the globe. Then we calculated the maximum sustainable blue water footprint by looking at the actual runoff, the natural runoff in the catchment, and subtracting the environmental flow requirements, and then compared it. And we did that on a monthly scale, on the grid scale. And then you see here how many months of the year there is water scarcity. So how many months of the year do we see that the blue water footprint is larger than its maximum sustainable blue water footprint and thus infringes environmental flows? Well, you see that happen in obvious places that we know, in the Middle East, in parts of Asia, also here in the US. And of course, the Sahara, where you have very limited water availability. So any small water footprint there will exceed the maximum sustainable value. For green water, we have produced a similar map where we also looked at the total green water footprint of humanity and compared that to maximum sustainable green water footprint that accounts for the fact that you need to set aside certain amounts of land, in this case is the red parts, for biodiversity conservation. And then different areas pop up. We see here also parts of South America that suddenly pop up. And actually here in Northern Europe, in Germany and the Netherlands, we're actually green water scarce because we're already using all the green water that's available for productive purposes. Practically the entire Netherlands, we use all the grasslands and all the agricultural lands to grow crops and grow grass, and we have hardly any places left for biodiversity conservation. There's also a maximum sustainable greywater footprint. And recall that the greywater footprint was measured as the amount of water that you would need to dilute pollutants to such a level that they do no longer violate ambient water quality standards. So if we actually look at how much water is available in a river to dilute pollutants, we're talking about the actual runoff in a river. So our actual runoff is a maximum sustainable value, a maximum sustainable level to our greywater footprint. So in this study, they compared the greywater footprint of nitrogen to that maximum sustainable level. And you see then that values that are larger than 1, where the water pollution level exceeds 1, those are actually unsustainable, meaning that water quality standards, in this case related to nitrogen, are violated. And a similar map was produced also for phosphorus, where we see that, well, in many cases, there are severe exceedances of the maximum sustainable greywater footprint. Then I'd like to move on to the third topic, and that is efficiency. How efficiently do we use our water for producing and consuming food and energy? And first, I'd like to start with food. But to give you an overview of how much water do we actually use for our daily consumption pattern. Here is an example from a study we did for the European consumer, where we see that on average, the European consumer uses 5,000 liters of water per person per day. And 74% of that relates to the food that we consume. 26% relates to the energy that we consume and the water that is used to produce that energy. And less than 0.1% actually relates to the water that we use at home for showering, for cooking. So let's talk about this largest fraction, the water footprint of food. How sustainable and how efficient is our water footprint of food? Here an example of the Dutch consumer. Also for the Dutch person, 1% of the entire footprint of 4,000 liters per day per person relates to the water that we use at home. 84% relates to the food that we consume, and about half of that, this part of the pie, relates to the animal products that we consume. And for the Dutch people, that's a lot of milk actually. And the other half relates to plant-based products that we consume. And in this global study, where they calculated the water footprint of different crops and derived products, and also animal products and derived animal products, here we rank those different food items based on the water footprint in liter per kilogram in this column, where we've done that separately for the plant-based items and for the animal-based items. And then you see that among the plant-based food items, it's mainly cereals, oil crops, and in particular also pulses and nuts that have a significantly larger water footprint per kilogram. And when we look at the animal products, we see that particularly sheep and goat meat and bovine meat have much larger water footprints compared to the other animal products. And overall, we can say that the plant-based products have a significantly lower water footprint than animal-based products. But in the end, we don't need to consume kilograms. It's about the amount of nutritional value that we need to get out of it. So you can also compare the water footprints per kilocalorie. And then we see that, for example, starchy roots like potatoes and cereals are quite effective. They are very water efficient per kilocalorie, about 20 times more efficient than bovine meat. When we look at protein, a different picture arises. Then suddenly the pulses, which we're ranking pretty high in terms of kilograms, per gram of protein, they are pretty efficient. and so are some of the animal products like milk, eggs, and chicken meat. So what does this mean in terms of the total diet that we consume? Well, in Arjen's book, which he published in 2020, he made such an analysis of what it means to switch from a meat-based diet to a vegetarian diet or vegan diet in terms of water footprint. So here we see a rough sketch for an industrialized country, how the diet is built up, with a large part of the calories coming from plant-based products, mainly cereals, then a part from dairy and eggs, and a part from meat and fish. And then we see here the water footprint in liters per kilocalorie, which is smallest for plant-based items, larger, significantly larger for dairy and eggs, and even larger for meat and fish. This translates all in all into a water footprint of 4,480 liters per day. That's very similar for, this is basically what we see in the Netherlands and also in Germany. What if you would leave out the meat and fish from your diet? Well, that means, of course, that you need to compensate for that by also eating more plant-based products, and particularly the high-protein plant-based products like pulses. So by reducing this amount, you would need to increase the plant-based amount, but still you would achieve a reduction of about 37% in your water footprint. If you would then take an additional step and also ban dairy and eggs from your diet, of course, that means you would again need to eat more plant-based products, particularly the high protein value ones, which means that compared to the meat-based diet, you could roughly reduce your water footprint by half. So often it is heard that we should reduce our water use at home and shorten our shower. Well, you can put it into the context of the food that we consume, actually. If we would entirely stop showering, we could save 50 liters of water per day. But considering the amount of water that is in the food that we consume, you could actually make much more of a difference by changing your diet. For example, if for 1 day a week you would leave a hamburger aside and choose a plant-based alternative like a soy burger, it has been estimated you could save about 800 liters of water. So that puts it in perspective. But don't get me wrong, shortening your shower is a very good idea because it saves energy that you would need to heat up your shower unless you shower cold. And energy also consumes water. So as I said, for the average European consumer, it's about 26% of our water footprint relates to the energy that we use. And it makes quite a difference from what sources we extract that energy. So in this study in 2015, my colleagues estimated what is the water footprint, the green and blue, water footprint in this case, of different energy sources. So firewood, which we burn for heat, and for example, we use that heat then to generate the power, generate power. Hydropower, which also has a water footprint because we have created artificial reservoirs that weren't there in the first place, which now evaporate water from huge surfaces, therefore also contributing to the blue water footprint. And this is actually our current mix: nuclear, oil, coal and lignite, some geothermal and natural gas. This is the main mix that we have globally. And our challenge is to switch to renewables. But as you see, it makes quite a difference what choices we make in this respect when moving from fossil to renewable energy in terms of water footprint. Either we go into the direction of biofuels, bio-based economy, and large hydropower that would significantly increase our water footprint globally. The alternative, which has much lower water footprints, is geothermal, solar PV, so the panels on our roof, and wind. So in the subsequent study, my colleagues analyzed also what does this actually mean for the future scenarios of the International Energy Agency, the IEA. So here we see on the left-hand side the water footprint of our reference of the mix, the energy mix in 2010, and also the carbon footprint. Now it is estimated what will happen with the horizon 2035 if we continue the way we currently produce our energy according to the current policies that are in place. Then we would increase our water footprint, and we would also increase our carbon footprint because we are simply with a larger population and demanding more energy. Well, actually, if we actually move to new scenarios where we actually are more committed to reducing our carbon footprint, it was estimated that the water footprint will still increase, but the carbon footprint will reduce significantly. And then the IEA also produced their 450 scenario, which is called their greenest scenario because it reduces the carbon footprint the most. And it has a large share of biomass in the mix and also a large share of hydropower. And then we see that greenest scenario in terms of carbon footprint would lead to a very large water footprint. So Professor McConnell, Winnie Gerbert-Lenis, and Arjen Hoekstra developed also an alternative 450 scenario that would also be water efficient. And actually, it has still a low carbon footprint, but if you would quickly transition to solar, wind, and geothermal and keep a minimum of bioenergy and hydropower in your mix, you could actually also achieve a low water footprint. So it is possible, but it really depends on the choices that we make in how we move away from fossil fuels to renewables. So how are we in the time? Okay, good.
It's okay.
Then one of the last topics is fairness and security. We already talked about the sustainability and efficiency of our water footprint, but what about, is it fair? Is it equitable? What we see here is the water footprint of consumption. And the water footprint of consumption shows the amount of fresh water that is used to produce all the goods and services that are consumed by the people in a certain country. So for the case of China, it relates to all the water use behind the products that are consumed by the Chinese people, which is partly taking place in China, but also taking place in other countries of the world from which they import goods and thus also import virtual water. And we see quite some big differences across countries, and only some main countries are plotted here. This is about the global average. Germany is about on the global average roughly, the Netherlands as well. But we see that the USA is much above that, and particularly some countries in China and in Southeast Asia, I mean, have some lower water footprints per person. And that mainly has to do with the diet. So these are some photos that I borrowed from a colleague, Davy Vanham, who produced this back in 2017, where I tried to visualize actually how much water is in the diet of a certain of a person's behind a person's diet. So we placed people with their typical diet in front of a water tank that actually contained the amount of water that we estimated is behind their water use. And we see that here for Germany, and we see that here for Italy. Italy, it is larger than in Germany, mainly because of a higher consumption of meat products, but also wine and olives have quite high water footprints. And here another example where we see a similar comparison, but then for the US, the country with the largest water footprint per person, and India, one of the countries with the lowest water footprint per person. And the main difference is here, of course, the total calories that are consumed, which are higher in the US, but also in India, it is much more common to have a fully plant-based diet, which makes a big difference in terms of water footprint. So what does this mean? Well, if we currently look at the water footprint per person in different countries, the USA is here. And China, as the most populous country of the world, is here. If we would simply do nothing and keep business as usual, probably in the US, it will go down a bit as water efficiency in agriculture can expect it to increase a bit as yields increase. However, in China, it is expected that people will start more and more adopting a different diet, one with high protein and low carbohydrates, therefore also maybe increasing their water footprint per person a bit. However, what will happen to the maximum sustainable water footprint, assuming that it's an equal share for every person in the world? So the maximum sustainable water footprint is plotted here in red. And we can imagine that will go down a bit simply because freshwater resources, we can expect they will remain more or less the same, but we are with more and more people. So for the UN medium population scenario, it is expected that it will decline by this amount, which actually would mean that, well, some countries would need to reduce their water footprint a lot if we were to move to equal shares per person. And for other countries, we really have to make sure it doesn't exceed that, what they're already consuming in this hypothetical scenario. Then what about security? Because we are virtually trading goods and services, we are virtually trading water, which actually creates water dependencies, global water dependencies between nations. It was estimated actually what are the main virtual water flows and who is net importer and who is a net exporter of water. And then we find that there are a couple of main net importers of water, which are mainly in the Middle East, North Africa, Mexico, Europe, and Japan. Those are the yellow to red countries on this map. And there are a couple of main net exporters of virtual water, mainly in South America, the US, Australia, and India. And some of these net virtual water importing regions have significant external water dependencies. And this is then defined as the amount of their water footprint that is not located in the country itself, but abroad. And for the case of Jordan, that's actually 86%, which means they are very much dependent on external water resources. And Jordan is a case where they're actually also physically dependent on external water resources with upstream countries, but even more so related to virtual water, it turns out. And then you can wonder whether it is a strategy of countries or necessity. I think for many countries that are pretty water scarce, it is also a necessity to import virtual water in order to maintain the diets that they have or that they desire. For other countries, it may also be a strategy to externalize their water footprint. So let's talk about the case of the Netherlands, for example. This is the blue water footprint of the Netherlands. So related to all the products that people in the Netherlands consume, but it's spread all over the globe, as you see, related to products that we import. But this map was overlaid by the water scarcity map that we saw before. So we can actually say in which parts of the world is blue water used to produce goods for Dutch consumption in places where that blue water is used unsustainably, where we are actually exceeding the maximum sustainable blue water footprint. And then we find that 43% of the Dutch blue water footprint is unsustainable, meaning that it's in places where the blue water footprint exceeds its maximum sustainable level. And it is mainly located in these 6 countries: Pakistan, the US, Spain, India, Egypt, and Iran. And we also note to which products it relates to. So in the US, it's mainly rice and soybean that we import. It's olives, rice, and grapes from Spain. It's sugar beets and sugar cane here from the Nile River Basin. It's nuts and dates from Iran. And it's sugar cane and rice from India and Pakistan from the Indus River Basin. And in a more recent study, they actually did this kind of analysis for all the countries in the world. And they published the top 25 countries with a large unsustainable blue water footprint. For example, we see here that for Turkmenistan, 66% of their blue water footprint is unsustainable. They call it here EFR infringing, meaning that they are tapping into environmental flow requirements, the EFR. And that fraction is significantly larger than 50% at least for all these countries that are plotted here. And you also see where it mainly comes from. So for Morocco, it's largely also internally. It also relates to products to import from Spain, Syria, and the US. And, oh, sorry. And then there's also for other countries here, for Turkey, for example, 85% of the unsustainable blue water footprint is in Turkey, but it also relates to imports from the US, Turkmenistan, and some other countries. So we talked about sustainable, efficient, and fair use of fresh water. Now, what can we actually do about that? Do we have some ideas for that? Well, to improve our environmental sustainability of our water footprint, the target should be to reduce the water footprints in catchments to sustainable levels of water use. That could be done, for example, by agreeing on water footprint caps that would need to be set by river basin. And I will go after this slide, I will show you an example of what I mean with those caps. Talking about efficiency, we could set targets, we could set benchmarks for the water footprint of products. So what are reasonable amounts of water use to produce a certain product? Talking about fairness and social equity, the goal should be to agree internationally on what are fair water footprint shares per community. Are those equal? Maybe not. Well, that's something that should be up for debate. What are fair shares by nation? And in terms of security, well, there's of course a trade-off between importing water to save local water resources, but also the import dependency that you create by that, and whether that's wanted or not. So an example of what we mean with water footprint caps by basin. Here's an example of the Aral Sea basin, where we see here the natural runoff plotted over the year. But we cannot use all of that natural runoff. We need to set aside each month a certain fraction of that as environmental flows. And a typical rule of thumb is 80%. That's the one that's plotted in this figure. So considering that you would need to set 80% aside, this leaves the rest here, this line, available as blue water availability. So a cap would, for example, be set at this level, meaning actually that the current water footprint exceeds that cap from June until October. You would need to reduce it in those months in order to get into a sustainable situation. Then about water efficiency and setting process water footprint benchmarks. One way to do that is, for example, to look at how efficient are current producers. You can rank producers worldwide. In this case, that was done for the case of wheat production. You can rank them from low to high water footprints. And you can set a value at the 25th percentile and say, well, 25% of the producers of wheat globally use 1,000 liters of water per kilogram of wheat or less. So that could be, for example, a benchmark. This is just a very ballpark starting figure because you can imagine that it also depends on where you are on the globe. What are your production potentials? So maybe a better way to set benchmarks is to look at best available technologies in each place. For example, how much water could we save if you move from current practices to drip or precision irrigation, or to organic farming with less pollutants entering the water, or in case of industry, to move to full water recycling and closed cycled cooling. So a couple of examples. For example, common practice in irrigation is sprinkler, though a much more efficient form to reduce your water use is drip irrigation. And in terms of the amount of water that is polluted, or the amount of pollutants that reaches groundwater, organic precision farming would be a best available technology compared to spraying pesticides. In the case of industry, like I said, moving from open cooling to closed cooling systems could make a big difference. And in terms of water quality, it's about treating water, which is not common practice still in many parts of the world. So what can we do? Well, different people have different responsibilities and opportunities to act. For example, governments can take a role in actually taxing water from taxing products from that are water intensive and are coming from water hotspots. They can also be the front runner in installing water footprint caps and permit systems. As direct water users, farmers, industries, also just people in the households, they can apply best available technology and simply be responsible of how much water they use. But there's also supply chain responsibility that the water footprint points to. As consumers, we are in control of what we consume, how much we consume, and which products we consume. So we can actually make a change by making those daily choices. Obviously, when you're in a supermarket, you don't know yet what are the products with the largest water footprint or the most sustainable from a water perspective. So demanding product transparency from producers is also something we could do. Companies carry, of course, a responsibility for their own supply chains, and they could cooperate with their suppliers to make agreements on setting targets, setting benchmarks for water footprint reduction. Similarly, investors that hold our pension funds and hold our savings, they can also make decisions. They decide in what to invest our money. So if investors would be more open about where they invest in and would have clear water sustainability criteria to which they judge their investment decisions, that could also make a difference. And of course, international cooperation on the UN level, for example, working towards the SDGs is also a way to take responsibility. The media plays a role by raising awareness about water use and where that's a problem, but also by investigative journalism and really tracking the performance of governments and companies in terms of water use. And we as academics, we also have a role to play by actually doing the research and showing where water use is sustainable and where it is not. So all in all, it's a shared responsibility. So last question that I have for you, what can we do ourselves to reduce the impact of our water footprints? Multiple answers are possible.
Can you move
It's again on WooClap.
to previous?
It's coming now. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, nice. All of them are there and they're all correct. We can do all of these, right? we can use less food, use less energy by wasting less, by being conscious about how much we consume. We can adjust what we consume by deciding on what electricity we buy. We can adjust our own diet. Well, we need to demand product transparency from producers to actually make those informed choices. And actually, if you choose a bank or investor that has clear water sustainability criteria in their portfolio decisions, that also makes a difference. That's something that's still coming. In the some 3 years ago, we did a study where we ranked the Dutch investors in terms of their water disclosure. They were all performing pretty badly, so they were all triggered to do something about it, and follow-up projects are emerging now. Okay, that is all I wanted to share with you today. Thank you very much for your attention. And well, I guess the floor is open now for all your questions.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Very, very good. Thank you very much, Professor Schins, for this very nice presentation. And I think tomorrow I will reduce my shower from 1 hour to 5 minutes.
1 hour, yeah?
No, but the story behind is that, of course, that everybody is asked, what can you do in order to reduce use the water, everyday water? And everybody has its own answer, but one answer can be reduction. And I think you gave us a very, very nice and interesting insight. And I think all of us, all of the listeners now today, have one day more now learned that water is a precious, it's not an element, but it's a precious natural product. And we have to take care of this. And the data you have given to us and the slides, the information is where the basics, and that we get now the idea in how to manage it in the future. This question and the discussion, the debate on this is very, very old already. We don't talk about water footprint not only today. That's also a few decades before water footprint was an issue. But what I understand, and let's wait. And I would like to invite the listeners to write down their questions in the chat. But before that, I would like to ask you one thing. I understand that the water is a global issue. Water footprint is a global issue. And when we look to globalization, which gives us more or less a vision for the future, what do you think? Do we have to rethink globalization in view of a water footprint? Because water footprint is, when we look to agro industry, when we look to industry, a very, very important product used in these areas. So what about globalization? Do we have to rethink it more than now?
Well, the alternative of globalization is protectionism, right? That every country starts doing their own thing. I don't think that's the solution. I do think the solution is international cooperation and also an open economy. I mean, there are negative effects of that, like the externalized water footprints that some countries are externalizing their pressures on fresh water to other countries of the world. The positive side of the coin is that there are also water scarce countries that actually have the opportunity to lift certain standards that go beyond their local limits, because they're having the possibility to import these goods. So I don't think moving away from globalization is the solution. I do think we should actually foster that international cooperation, but think wisely about how we arrange that, and that could be done by talking about trade agreements,
Yes.
while also accounting for what does that mean in terms of impacts on water. And actually, I didn't share that yet, but there's actually an initiative that was launched at the COP in Copenhagen last year, where they are talking about fair water footprint declarations, which was signed by the UK and a couple of other countries, and the Netherlands is also thinking of signing it, where they're actually saying we want to move to fair water footprints, and they are yet still defining what that implies. What are fair water footprints, and what are we committing to then? Which is also why some of the countries are still hesitant to sign it. But there is actually an international discussion now going on how should we make sure that we as nations, but also as companies, a couple of companies are also signed the declaration. How can we move to make sure that our the water footprint in our supply chain is sustainable and fair in the future.
Well, I hope in this case it will not go the way what we see when nations talk about how to overcome and how to tackle climate change. So there were many conferences and many books were written on that. Unfortunately, it is my observation, nothing happened so much. Sometimes there were some good solutions, but I think the same problem we will have in the area of water footprint. And to my feeling, or what my impression is, that when we look to globalization, sustainability has not yet very well defined in that thing. We have still too much exploitation of water resources without any plans.
Yeah, and that's true. And the main issue is, of course, that water is not factored into the price of traded commodities.
Yes. And they may be good solutions. I don't know whether you have heard from this Kahlenberg symbiosis. That is where water, blue water, and also gray water is used in a kind of industrial network where the amount of fresh water, of blue water, could be reduced because the water has been used water, was used as a good and sold to another entity, to another industry. I think that worldwide could be a good solution, a good plan, how to reduce in that area, in the industrial area, how to reduce the water use and to increase the water reuse. I don't know, maybe...
Yeah, the concept that you mentioned is not familiar to me, but indeed, reusing water and using closed systems where you recycle it and reuse it again and again before discharging it is, of course, an ideal solution to still use it but reduce your water footprint.
Maybe I can show you this this slide. This is not only a plan; it's a real existing network in Kahlenberg, and here energy, water, and reused or used water is shared as a good. So one entity, one industry is using the water from another, and the result is that the water pollution could be reduced to a certain extent, but also the fresh water use as well. Yeah, just to show. But let's now see what are the questions from the audience.
Can I make a comment?
Yeah, sure.
I have raised my hand.
Yes.
Huh? But okay. Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Yu, for interesting, although it was very nice. I want to make a short remark, a short comment. We are living in, as I am living in Antalya. We have several 100,000 tourism beds. Tourism sector is very developed. And one of my colleagues, Handan Shahin, she is with us now. She has worked in her master thesis on water footprint of tourism in Antalya. And it was demoralizing, as I must say, because in most of these hundreds of thousand beds, they based on system of all-inclusive system. And in this all-inclusive system is the water usage or the water footprint is several times higher than normal people living in Antalya. Now, you mentioned fair water footprint. Yes, how to decide it now? So if you are living, say, in a high-income country, in Germany, Holland, England, and so on, you pay, say, okay, a couple of €100 and then travel, okay, this is also carbon footprint, travel to Med Sea region, for example, to Jordan or to Egypt or to Antalya, and then you cause a reasonable amount of water footprint. Yeah, Also we are facing with this problem year by year, and every year we are talking about it, but it is not possible to reduce it, or to take any precautions against it. It is a fact. No? It is a problem for us, for our regions, for all MENA region, I must say.
So to see if I understand your question right, the problem is that tourists are using too much water.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, the most of the water in this the system, tourism system, the applied system, all-inclusive system. In all-inclusive system, the most of the water footprint of tourists produced from meat, from food, and from alcoholic drinks. And it is a problem. It is not possible to reduce it. Also, we need a political change, change on minds of how to develop tourism in the near future. But it is now a widespread issue in all Med Sea countries, also in many countries. And but in the future, it will be more problematic, I must say.
Yeah.
For us.
You say it cannot be reduced, but I'm more optimistic about that. I mean, it is eventually it is the demand of the consumer that asks for those kind of arrangements, and then it's the local tourism sector who provides for that because they want to make money out of it. I do hope that that we can change the attitude of the consumers, that an all-inclusive hotel with all you can eat and all you can drink is not sustainable, and that they may also choose for different options, which then also will make sure that, eventually will lead to that also the tourism sector will start developing other options for them to still have leisure. It's in the end, for me personally, it's not about sitting in a hotel and consuming as much as I can. I'd like to see the environment when I'm on vacation.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah,
I would like to invite again the listeners to write down their questions. We have one from Elvis Carissimi. Hi, Elvis. The question to you is, Jupp, do you think that the COVID pandemic helped to reduce the water footprint? I mean, with reduction of activities, restaurants, diet habits, travels, and so on.
Yeah, well, as an academic, I of course have to directly make the disclaimer, I didn't research it, but I would expect so, yes. I mean, particularly travel that reduced, so we consumed a lot less of energy. That had a big effect on our carbon footprint for a while, but also our water footprint related to travel. I didn't show that today, but the water footprint of biofuels is also quite significant, about 300 liters per kilometer, based on a rapeseed, I think, in the mix. So yeah, I think that definitely helped to reduce the water footprint. But well, as you also see now for carbon footprint, as the economy is slowly moving back to how it was before, those effects are also moving away again. We have here the normal traffic jams again every day.
Elvis, you would like to comment?
Oh, I'd like to thank you so much for your very nice and interactive lecture. And I learned a lot. I work mainly on just a small, this is in a small context with water and wastewater treatment. And you gave us today a broadened view of the water footprint. So that's why I was trying to compare, because I see a lot of researchers comparing prior the pandemic, during the pandemic, and now, as you said, you are going back to normality. So it's interesting to compare. So thank you so much.
Thanks for your compliment to hear that.
Probably in the future we'll have some papers or some works comparing the effects. Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, Murphy, you raised your hand.
Yes, please. I would like to share one picture with you. If you allow me to show the picture, can you see that?
Wait.
Can you see my screen?
No.
How can I manage to show you the picture?
You go down to Freigeben.
Okay. So, okay. So this one.
Yeah.
Mhm.
This is a graph from German Institution for Water Sources and showing the water consumption in Germany in 2004. From potentially available water, 188 billion cubic meter are 81% non-use, the green one on the top, and only 36 billion cubic meter are used for the different purposes. So this might be somehow in contradiction about the concept of water footprint, for instance, for Germany, that the German consumer should stop their water footprint or reduce their water footprint, as almost 81% of available water resources are still unused. Is it a contradiction, or how can you solve this contradiction?
Thanks for your question. I'm still interpreting the figure here. It's about water consumption and potentially available water.
Yes.
So which
In
one
Germany,
is
in Germany, we have an annual available water amount of 188 billion cubic meter.
Yeah. Oh, and
Altogether, rivers, rainwater, etc., etc. And of these are 81% non-used, non-consumed. So, and only 36% is consumed.
yeah.
And by agriculture, almost nothing, because rainwater feeding is there very much in Germany. Therefore, we do not need much surface water to irrigate fields, agricultural fields. And the public water supply makes up just 2.8%. And if the people would start to live after your concept of water water saving through dietary, through showering, and all the other consuming processes, they would not change the available water usage of 81% non-use. Does it make sense for these people, German people, to save water?
Yes.
And why? Why?
Well, the crux is that the water footprint of the average German consumer is not in Germany. So also in Germany, what the Germans consume is also for a large fraction imported from other countries.
Yes, we have a lot of import of water. Yeah.
Yes, and I think for Germany also imports a lot of dairy products from the Dutch industry, which in their case import a lot of feed ingredients from for example South America. So if you would trace the supply chain of the German consumer, you also would end up in all kinds of different places of the world. And the trick is not to put water consumption of the German people at home into this context of this picture that you show, but it's about comparing their water footprint, which is all across the globe, in those local contexts of water availability. And if you do that, then you see that consumption causes, or at least contributes to, water issues in other places of the world.
So that means it would help that the German people would buy local products instead of importing food.
That's yeah, for the case of Germany, that would be one of the solutions. Yeah. Although not all imports are bad, of course, but there are also water sustainable imports. Actually, after this talk, I will share a link to a study on the water footprint of German consumption if you're interested. I have to look up the link and I can share it with you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
From Antalya, for example, we are exporting tomatoes to Germany. It means also that the water, amount of water which is needed for the produced product is also transported exported to Germany without any payment. But this is virtual water export.
Yeah, indeed, they only pay for the tomatoes, and as long as the water over exploitation is somehow not factored into the price of the tomatoes, then they are indeed not paying for that. Yeah, similar. You already mentioned in the beginning that I did a case study from Morocco a while back. There is also tomatoes is one of the big export products to the world market. And indeed, in many cases, they're over-exploiting blue water resources to irrigate tomatoes, which are then exported to the world market. And well, there's no good or bad in that. It's just what our footprint assessment shows that's the case. That apparently the choice is being made to use and overuse partially Moroccan water resources to generate income for export. And the idea is to show that well, to give these insights and what are the final end purposes of what we're using water for, to generate a debate among, in this case, the Moroccan policymakers, to see, is this what we want, or do we want to change our policies?
That's very important. And okay, who's sharing the screen at the moment? Buffett, is it?
Thank you.
You can unshare.
How do I that?
You can unshare the screen.
I think on the top of your screen it should
Okay,
share.
thank you.
Okay. There is one comment from Professor Anwar Giris. He's writing, I think water management is an important issue to reduce water footprint. For example, in Jordan, there are many banana farms which are known for their high water demand. Well, I think this is in many countries. You already mentioned this also in the MENA region, but also for Spain. It applies for Spain and Morocco as well. I know it from Morocco. I think there are some colleagues here who are from Morocco. There is a new, as far as I know, strategy of the government, because they have seen, because of climate change, not that amount of water is coming from the mountains, high mountains nearby, which was used in the past for irrigating the orange producing farms and then farms producing vegetables and so on. So they have to make a change because they couldn't refill or cannot refill groundwater resources, and they cannot use the water amounts that that could be used from waters coming from the mountains nearby. So that is the agro industry, and as far as I know, also in MENA region there is a big discussion how to use now treated wastewater. I think that is still a critical point because you have to see what kind of treated wastewater you're using. It is free from heavy metals and other micropollutants and so on. But I think in the future we cannot afford anymore not to use treated wastewater. What do you think, Jörg? What is your experience and what is happening?
Yeah, treated wastewater, indeed, I think it is part of the solution. A big challenge is, of course, the social acceptance of it. People do not like the idea in many countries that the food that they eat is being produced with treated wastewater. But I think that in the end, that can be overcome probably by proper awareness raising. The pitfall with reusing wastewater is that it's not additional water, right? It's still, in a certain month, we still have only the rainfall in that month available, and of course groundwater that we could pump. And with reusing wastewater, we can use it more efficiently, but we should not count ourselves rich and see it as a really additional water resource, because in the end, you can only use it for one purpose at a time.
Are there any data available to what amount? The goal is to reduce fresh water for irrigation. Worldwide, almost 75% of groundwater, fresh water is used in agriculture. How high is the potential to use, if we use treated wastewater, that we can reduce this amount of fresh water used in agriculture? So I think that could be an argument just to answer the question, sustainability if we use the wastewater.
Yeah, I would have no idea about actual figures about that topic. Yeah, the thing is, if you're talking about treated wastewater, that was also blue water before, right? So we subtract it, we use it in industry and households.
Yes.
Then you can treat it and you can use it afterwards for irrigation maybe. But then that is kind of, yeah, it is. You cannot use it for both at the same time. That's what I mean. It's not additional water use. It's still we can use it, and you can maybe use it afterwards for another purpose, but it's not really an additional source of water that we have available. So
no, it's not additional source, but it helps to reduce the use of fresh water. What we are doing right now is just to, let me say, throw away the wastewater into the rivers. They go to it goes to the ocean. But the fresh water, if you look at groundwaters, if you want to recharge groundwaters, it takes a certain period of years, yeah, to get fresh water and clear and clean water. So just to overbridge the time when there is a lack of fresh water, that we don't throw away the wastewater, so we bring it back into the cycle.
yeah, that
Of
could
course,
certainly be a local solution, but I don't think. Also, it's not throwing away, right? If you discharge it clean into the environment, it contributes to the environment, right? To the environmental flows.
But it gives time to the natural water resources to get recharged and to renew itself, not to exploit it to an extent where it is not possible anymore to get the fresh water from there. What we see is from many, maybe colleagues from MENA region can agree, or also from other countries, that more and more wells and drilling holes are overexploited and the water is getting more and more salinated. So the question is how to give time for the recharge, to refill, to get fresh water while using wastewater, treated wastewater. I know that will be an investment. It costs money, but this is also a question to the majority society to say, yes, we have to do that. Otherwise, we will run out in a very, in a conflict, water crisis.
Yeah, I cannot give you the answers, of course. But I would also be interested in the research to see to what degree this could help to solve the issue. I do think that it can only be a part solution, and I think that in many regions, simply reducing the water use, capping the water use is the major thing that needs to be done. To set maximum sustainable levels to how much water we allow to be consumed in a river basin, allow to be pumped from groundwater, make sure to distribute that over the users according to permits, and set benchmarks for what are reasonable amounts to produce a certain product or to grow a certain crop. For example, such benchmarks can be used to inform on how much permit you give someone.
I understand that this reuse of wastewater is one element. How to manage this water footprint problem. Another one is, Anwar Jiris mentioned it, is also to improve and to have a better water management. And this needs political decision, wise political decision, and that we have the majority society to say yes to all these paradigm shifts, where we have to look at our own lives and what can we reduce, what we can do, make better. And this is something that should happen very quickly.
Sustainable water management. It includes, normally it was 3, but 4 Fs. Reduce, reuse, recycle, recover.
Exactly.
It's the same as waste management.
Exactly.
But it is not possible, for example, in Antalya to reduce tourism-based water footprint because, if you say, okay, we are not applying all-inclusive system, the tourists will be
Go somewhere else.
choose another region. Therefore, miracle
Right.
is needed.
All right. Are there any questions or comments from the audience? Colleagues who would like to ask a question directly? You can raise your hands. Well, it's not the case. Obviously. Okay. Yes, Dylan.
Okay. Yeah. Also, do you have any experience? Also, can you evaluate the countries' water footprint versus economic value, economic added value of the product, produced product? For example, as I have seen it in Egypt, I don't know if we have colleagues from Egypt here with us, but as they are producing cotton, it is the same in Antalya, the southern part of Turkey. Also, cotton is the last plant, I must say, which can be produced in our region. But the cotton from Egypt, the economic value is very high. Do you know any are there any studies also comparing? Can it be used as a decision-making process factor? If you produce a high economic value product, you can use also much water also.
Yeah, there are definitely studies who did that. I think it started with doing this for Spain. Dr. Maite Aldaya did studies for Spain where she looked at economic water productivity, where she did express the water footprint not only in kilograms of product, but also in euros or obtained for selling those products. I did something similar for Morocco, and there you indeed saw that the main water users, from the top of my head, barley and wheat, the most water is used to produce barley and wheat, but those have the lowest economic water productivity. On the other hand, tomatoes and oranges have a very high water productivity. They use a lot of water, but they also have a very large income generated. So I think that should certainly be taken into account. I wouldn't say, like you put it, that if there's a high income, you can also have a high water use, but rather to take that economic water productivity also into account when making decisions on to what sectors, to what activities are we going to allocate the water.
Okay. Yeah, Professor Bader.
Dr. Joop, we have seen that the production of beef is very high water consuming issue. And we know that some countries, in particular Brazil, but much more Argentine, are producing beef for the world market. What would you propose to the Argentine politician to change this water consuming production, agriculture production, to another one, which is not only water saving, but also economically feasible for the country? Because it must be also accepted by the people and by the policy there that if they save water, that the outcome for overall outcome is positive and not negative for the country.
Well, thanks. That's a very nice question, and also a very big one to answer. I do think this is not something only for in this case, the Argentinian government, but also for the consumers who are actually consuming the beef from the world market. They're also responsible for the water use that's happening in Argentina there. In this particular case, I think an issue is that in many cases, they're using a lot of grassland where the cows are grazing, which evaporates water. So there's large green water footprints. The issue is also that as the demand for meat products increases, and Argentina is one of the main producers and trying to meet that demand, they're increasing their production, meaning in practice that they need more grasslands for the cows to walk on, which So they're looking for more green water resources actually, which has an effect that is visible in the form of deforestation. That they're into forest frontiers, they're ranging with pastures. So I think this is a typical example of how Western meat consumption contributes to these kinds of issues in other places, like in Argentina.
I'm all aware about these problems, but my question is towards the acceptance by the people there, that they say it would make more profit for me to change from meat to another production process. What can they do on the grassland other than producing beef?
Mm-hmm. Well, then I would think you could, you could arrange by making international agreements on how to tax certain imports of products. Because if you would tax products based also on water intensity and have higher taxes on water intensive imports, it will be less attractive on the global market to import meat from Argentina, and maybe it's more attractive to produce it locally. But of course, this is something you need to agree on internationally, because if only one country does this, that's not going to work out.
Many of the American, North and South American countries produce soybean that is used worldwide, mostly for fodder production, for feed, for animals. If we stop eating animal meat, we stop also using internationally using soybean. So everything has to change from soybean to something else.
Yeah, so I think that's already the answer. That if the consumers change their consumption patterns, their production patterns will also change too, because there's no demand anymore. So personally, I think there's many of these problems can be solved starting from the consumption perspective. And of course, locally, there's responsibility for governments to make sure that water resources and land resources are protected, such that it's also simply not possible in some cases to use water or land unsustainably.
Well, I think when you look to the global market, the problem will still remain, even if you switch from, I don't know, from growing cows in Argentina to other products. I think the main problem is uncontrolled, that must be solved, and consumer behavior as well, but uncontrolled exploitation of resources like water, and mass production is also a big problem. And this all is an issue of sustainability. As long as this is not solved, we can do whatever we want. If we do not solve this problem, and it's a kind of business as usual. Even if we switch from meat eating to becoming vegetarians, if there will be still mass production, overproduction, and uncontrolled exploitation, then we will never solve the problem of water footprint.
Yeah.
Jose, you have a question.
Hello, everyone. I don't
Jose
believe,
from Brazil, right?
yes. I don't believe we have to blame Argentina for beef production, because in Argentina, the beef is produced in a natural biome that is called Pampa. There is a grassland over there. I believe you have to blame Brazil, because Brazil is deforesting two important biomes, Cerrado and also the Amazon jungle, not only to produce beef, but also to produce soybean. It's amazing the number of forests that has been deforested during the past 4 years in Brazil. And we are reducing the amount of water that we have because of such deforestation. That's the main problem. We have to blame Brazil, not Argentina.
Okay.
Yeah, well, I I can only agree that, but I don't think anyone was blaming Argentina in this case. I would just like to add to that it's not just Brazil and Argentina, the producing countries, but it's also the consumers in other countries that are creating demand for these products. And like Andrea said, it's up to those local governments to also make sure that their natural resources are sufficiently protected, such that meeting this mass production is also not possible by expanding into these biomes. Yeah.
There is one, if you allow me to look at the chat, there's one question from Menber Behihun. Yes, I hope it's spelled well. Joop, how do you think is the economical aspect to treat the wastewater to be used for consumption, especially in developing countries? Can wastewater treatment and reuse be a solution to prevent large water exploitation from the natural reserve? That is the discussion we had before, but more specifically now for Global South.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I'm not a wastewater treatment expert, so I cannot say anything about how economically attractive it is. I do think that if you really want to use it for human consumption, you probably need to treat it to a pretty high degree, which is costly. Whether that's cost effective, I cannot tell you. And about the last question, can wastewater treatment be a solution to prevent large-scale overexploitation? That comes back to the earlier point that I made, that I don't think so. I mean, it can contribute to reducing extra water withdrawals from the system during certain parts of the year, but on a large scale, you cannot see it as a solution because it's still drawing upon the same starting point of freshwater availability.
I think this is also a question of time. It can be a solution on, let's say, not a long-term aspect, but maybe on short-term aspect. If you say, I can, from the fresh water I use in my industry or that I use in the industry, and when I reuse industrial water, then I can say perhaps that from 10 liters of fresh waters I needed before, and when I do this kind of reuse, I only need 1, 2, or 3 liters. And the other 7 liters will come back from wastewater treatment. And so that if we look at the time that we let the water resource, the time to recharge, to renew, to get fresh water, because this is a cycle. You mentioned this, yeah. The wastewater goes back to the sea, and we get it back as blue water or green water. But in between, there are time steps where water is used, and when we exploit it in this time case on the one part too much, we will get a problem. So I think it's a question of balancing the use of fresh water and the use of reused water.
I totally agree, but I would say that's small scale. Because if you would look at the total numbers, it just doesn't add up. That 90% of the water footprint of humanity is related to agriculture.
Yeah.
And only 9% or so related to industry. So if you would fully be able to treat and recycle all the water used in industry, still that's only can contribute to a small share of reducing the need of agriculture. So really, if the question is, can water reuse on a large scale avoid overexploitation of water resources? I would say no.
Okay. All right, let me check whether there is another. No one question in the chat. Any other colleague who would like to raise hands for a question? Vivid.
Just one comment. You mentioned just that 90% of water is consumed by agriculture. According to our literature knowledge, we assess about 70%. How do you get 90% from?
Yeah, the 70% is in terms of withdrawals. Indeed, 70% of global withdrawals is related to agriculture. But when we talk about consumptive use,
Mhm.
So not looking at subtracting the return flows from the withdrawals and purely looking at how much water is evapotranspired, then we come at 90%, because in agriculture, it's mostly all evapotranspires, while in industry, for example, and in households, also a large fraction of what is withdrawn is returned. So that's the difference.
But if we use 70% for agriculture or withdrawal for agriculture, I did not get it how I can make it up to that.
If we look at all the blue water that is abstracted globally, withdrawn from sources, 70% of those withdrawals relates to agriculture, irrigation. When we look at the total consumptive water use, so only the evapotranspiration in agricultural systems, in domestic and in industrial systems, and compare the consumptive water use of agriculture with the total consumptive water use, you get 90% for agriculture. So there are two different ratios. One is total water withdrawals, the other one is fraction of total consumptive water use.
But we can control only the 70%, not the 90%.
Well, that's not true. You can also control the consumptive water use.
Or can we control evapotranspiration?
For example, by changing your irrigation practices. Well, if you would not irrigate, for example, that would reduce your ET. It will, of course, also affect your yield. So there's an entire spectrum of how to irrigate. You can do that more efficiently by different technologies, but also by different timing.
Excuse me, but the irrigation we are doing is 70%. Then we irrigate 70%. How can we increase this amount to 90% of evapotranspiration? It is we cannot more evapotranspiration we can put in. What you are doing is to take out more out than to put in.
That's true, but what I'm saying is that 90% is, and at 70% they have a different base number to which you compare it.
Anyway,
so the 70% is
some discrepancies, yeah.
Yeah, it's not 90% of the withdrawals, it's 90% of the total consumptive water use.
Okay.
All right. Any other comments, questions? It's not the case. So I think we should come now to an end. I would like to thank especially Joep Schins, professor from Twente University in Netherlands. A lot of thanks for your time, and we learned a lot of water footprint now, because a certain number of colleagues who are here now are not that big experts in water footprint, same as me. And so we learned a lot of this important issue. And if we look to worldwide water consumption, water footprint is an issue. And we have to do research on it in order to get more sustainability, to know more about the food change, the production change, and where water is used, and where, when we analyze this, where water can be optimized. Bring it down to a minimum that we can keep it on a existing production level. So it's optimize water use, but keeping the production on a certain level. I think that is possible. A lot of thanks, Joep, to you, and many thanks to all the listeners, those who have registered. I would like to mention that we, in May, the 18th of May, we have another webinar. You have already seen the registration, and you have got the 2 links. I have heard from colleagues that there were some problems in the confirmation email. I will try to check out what happened there. But anyway, thanks to those who are here today, and wish you a good afternoon, good night, good morning, and see you next. And thank you very much, Joep.
Yeah, thank you.
Greetings to
Thank you for attending, and thank you for the lively discussion.
Yes, thank you very much.
Have a nice day.
To all. Bye-bye.
Thank you. See you all. Bye-bye.